On this week's show, your privacy, or what's left of it. Is technology a friend or a foe? Ever get the feeling you're being watched? It's not your imagination. Cameras are everywhere, including that thing in your pocket we used to call a phone. And that device itself is sharing more about you than you may realize. How much? And how can technology and public policy help you maintain what's left of your privacy? Let's ask Talk Radio's top tech expert, Dave Graveline. His weekend show, Into Tomorrow, is heard on a couple hundred stations across the USA and around the world, and you can hear and see it at intotomorrow.com. Dave joins us from RT's bustling Miami bureau, and he is a former Miami-Dade police officer, and why that matters to this discussion in a minute. And joining us from Providence, Rhode Island, the Ocean State, my state representative, House Minority Whip, the Honorable and always affable Blake Filippi. Gentlemen, welcome back to The Big Picture.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Here in the District of Columbia, justice is within your reach. When you download the Mobile Justice DC Today app, it's a smartphone app for both iPhone and Android. It enables users to record what they regard as civil rights violations by law enforcement, alerting other app users, and to submit videos and incident reports automatically to the American Civil Liberties Union in Washington, D.C. Dave, this is just one of many similar apps which, as police body cams do, capture what's happening. You see this from two camera angles, as a tech expert and as an ex-cop. Where do you come down on this?
Well, Holland, I like to think that I was a police officer in the good old days before everyone had a camcorder. Statute of limitations, I think, has run out on most. I'm just kidding. The point being is that many people have been, and they're certainly within their rights to do so, recording police officers and police activity. But so are police officers now with body cams, and many departments are going that direction to protect the officer and the citizen, for that matter. When questions come up, it's on video.
So you think it's a net plus?
I do, in fact, because a lot of times we see on Facebook or Instagram, you might see one portion of a video. Well, that's a select portion that perhaps the driver wasn't so thrilled about and chose to present that. How about what happened before that? That's why you see typically an officer will tap the body cam as they get out of the vehicle so that they get the entire interaction on video. It may or may not become a problem for the police officer, but most of them, certainly 99% of officers on the road now, know that that's really going to protect them as well as the citizen.
Well, I want to ask you both the same question. Let's see if we get the same answer. Dave, you're a former police officer. Blake, you're an attorney. If the officer tells you to stop recording, do you have to? Dave, then Blake.
No, it's my understanding, at least with most departments and most jurisdictions, you don't have to. Now, of course, you don't want to be shoving your phone in their face, right, and you know, violating their space and that sort of thing, just like you wouldn't want them to do the same. But I believe, for the most part around the country, you can certainly record activity. If you're impeding an investigation or you're in the way, different story.
Yeah, that's one thing. Blake?
I agree completely. The public sphere, you have First Amendment rights to record as long as you're not interfering with police business.
Blake, Rhode Islanders know you as very protective of privacy, particularly from tech snooping. Last December, when you were on the show, you told us about that Stingray device that enables warrantless tracking, and you introduced legislation to require a warrant. For those who missed that show, briefly explain what that Stingray box does.
Sure, it's called the cell site simulator, and it essentially mimics being a cell phone tower. When they turn the Stingray on, all the cell phones within a given area start feeding data into the cell site simulator. And police can get information as to locations of specific phones. They can determine all the identities of people within a certain proximity. So suppose there's a protest and they want to determine who all the protesters are, they can use the Stingray device to do that. And they can also obtain all the data and find out what you are using your phones for. They can look at the data that's stored on the phones. So it brings up a lot of privacy concerns when the government is employing these devices.
Define unreasonable search and seizure, and talk about that Carpenter case that you've told me about.
Do you have a reasonable expectation of privacy? If you have a reasonable expectation of privacy in data or your house or your effects, then the police must follow the probable cause warrant requirement, but there's several exceptions within that. The courts have said where a third party has your data, you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that data. So the police do not need a warrant to access that data, even though it's your data held by a third party. It's called the third party doctrine. What Carpenter did is it essentially took a bite out of the third party doctrine, and I think it's a great decision because it essentially said that even though your cell phone data location, years of it, is held by a third party, you still have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that, and the police need a warrant based on probable cause to access that data. So it was a very important decision on the third-party doctrine in this digital age because so much of our data is held by third parties that it's a great step in the right direction for the courts to now recognize our reasonable expectation of privacy in that data, and hopefully it's a new line of case law that expands our expectation of privacy in our data held by third parties, even though Carpenter was limited just to prior cell phone location data.
Gotcha. Dave, Blake first alerted me to
kind of wonky. I hope I explained it well.
No, that's good. Blake first alerted me to a story I have since shared with you, and Bloomberg reported that super micro motherboards used by Apple and Amazon contain Chinese spy chips, and although all three companies denied it, Bloomberg says Apple and Amazon had discovered it and reported it to the FBI in 2015, which Apple and Amazon also deny. So, Dave, I often hear callers on your show asking about privacy, what they can do to hack-proof computers and smartphones, and we've heard horror stories about Wiseguys hacking into baby monitors and Wi-Fi routers. To the extent we can, what can people watching us do to lock down at home?
Well, Holland, on home networks, many products are available, including things like a product called eBlocker. We had their CEO on the show in Berlin last month. You just plug this little $100 box into your home network, and it protects any and all devices on that network. Now, of course, if you leave and you're using your phone, it's no longer protected by that particular box. But many people do use some sort of internet security software already protecting your various devices, at least on that machine or that particular device. Many newer Wi-Fi routers have some sort of firewall. We always recommend to our audience to use them. And just as importantly, if not more so, use alphanumeric passwords, not your dog's name or something they're going to find on your Facebook or Instagram profile. Make it a little more complicated. Alphanumeric, put a couple of characters in there. People think, oh my gosh, how am I going to remember that? There are some great password tips that we can share with you anytime, and we do on a regular basis on our show because it's so important.
Yeah, Dave's website, intotomorrow.com, is searchable, and it's full of information and product reviews. And once again, that box you held up, Dave, that's called eBlocker, and it's $100.
Yeah, it starts at $100, and they have several other options to go on from there for additional monitoring and that kind of thing. But that's just one of many products available these days that are very easy. It literally is a plug-and-play thing that all your data runs through it. And then again, as you go up to different categories and even different products, you can control time that your kids might spend on the internet as well as some good parental controls as well.
After all the noise about election hacking, there is a new appreciation for paper ballots, hanging chads and all. And because Tuesday voting and long lines at the polls are inconvenient for many voters, this question, Blake, then Dave, do we dare ever vote by smartphone?
Never, never, for a couple reasons. One is the risk of hacking. There always needs to be a paper trail for our elections. And two, elections aren't popularity contests. On one hand, we want to make it easier, but to what extent? We want people who vote to be informed. We want to make people who vote actually have to go through some process to vote. It's not a popularity contest where you should turn on your phone in the morning and hit a button. You need to go down to the poll, or you need to apply for a mail ballot. and that ensures that people who are voting are informed. This isn't American Idol.
Dave, how about it? It is not American Idol, and there are enough holes in the smartphone that you'd be wary of that too, wouldn't you?
Yes, in fact, I would be. But as the tech guy, you would expect me to disagree somewhat with Blake that eventually I think we'll be there. But the wireless networks, more importantly, the local government's computer networks, are definitely not secure enough to not be hacked. And worse, we've got to be able to prevent people from voting more than once. So will it happen? I think so. Anytime in the near future? Likely not.
Well, let the record show you are a Floridian saying so. You lived through the hanging chads, right?
Hanging chads.
And,
yes, among other things.
And Blake, you're running unopposed, so if it comes back that you lost, I think we're going to look into election hacking. Am I right?
Yes, I would demand a paper ballot recount, Holland.
Hey, what do your constituents talk to you about relating to privacy other than all of the aforementioned? What are some of the other concerns out there, Blake?
You know, one of the things we've been working on a lot are government use of drones, when it's appropriate for the government to use drones without a warrant. Supreme Court case law has said you do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in the airspace above your home. And so something that's on the front burner that a lot of reps are looking at is creating a warrant requirement for when police can use a drone. We have to remember the Constitution is the bare minimum protections we're entitled to in our republic. We can always provide statutory protections for privacy in excess of our Constitution, and I think we need to do that more. Drones are a big issue. Other data that is held by third parties, not just our cell phone location data, is very important. When can the government access our web browser history? That's something which I think is very private, which there should be a warrant requirement absent exigent circumstances. All of our lives are on these cell phones now, and I just hope that this third-party doctrine established in Carpenter, or knocked down a little bit in Carpenter, expands and expands. And finally, on the Chinese chips, are we even surprised that the Chinese were putting in hacker chips in this hardware? Most of their military hardware is knockoffs of ours in Russia. So I don't think there should be any surprise that they were putting in these backdoor chips.
Yeah, a good point about the Constitution, too. The Founding Fathers could not have envisioned drones, and every once in a while I'll hear a righty on talk radio crabbing that well, the government shouldn't do anything that's not in the Constitution, which I think would be bad news for the Air Force. But time and technology marches on. Thank you, Dave Graveline, IntoTomorrow.com, and Rhode Island State Representative Blake Filippi. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
When you question more, you get more. Not some tired parade of the same old voices. What you get is more. Insight, distance, depth, stories from all over the world. More than the mainstream could ever deliver. Lift your eyes to all that remains in question.